So the build that I just showed you is an Ignite Chronomancer utilizing temporal chains, recoup, and split health mana stacking for defensive layering, allowing us to tank stuff like difficulty 4 Just Hands. This character hits 35 mil on a single Flame Blast, with an upper end capable of hitting 40-ish mil with a big upgrade or two to be made. In theoretical ceiling sheet made by another theory crafter that I collaborate with, you can do a similar Blood Mage version for 200 mil ignites. I'll link his video in description, as he's the guy who figured out most of the crit ignite scaling. I want to warn you that this is not a build guide, but rather a journal of Ignite, Chronomancer, and Recoup and the current state of the game. This build basically is the culmination of a lot of off-meta mechanics, so I wanted to show off what I was able to achieve with the current setup. So overall, how does this all feel? So Chronomancer is a Slowmancer playstyle, and it feels decent. The idea is stacking temporal chains along with the Ascendancy passive ends up supporting Flame Blast quite well. This is because simply we don't want to be interrupted with casting Flame Blast, and it makes grippy content a lot easier to work around. You sort of just float around, as most of the mobs are basically almost time locked. And so Ignite as a damage type can be great, but when putting it together on the tree, I feel that most of the Ignites are fighting you rather than helping you. Most of the small passives leading up to the major Ignite notables are either fire damage or Ignite chance, when really what you want is Ignite magnitude. What that ended up looking like is I don't invest in Ignite chance, as I just opt to hit really hard and have Ignite chance implicitly. It's weird because if I were to invest in Ignite chance with smaller hits, it wouldn't make any sense, as Ignite wouldn't really deal any damage in the first place. To put it simply, right now what you need is big hits to deal substantial damage with Ignite, which means you implicitly get Ignite chance with that big hit. And the tree just doesn't seem to line up with what you want on Ignite builds like that. And so Recoup, pretty decent, but ends up really just filling this role of being regeneration but better. Regeneration is pretty expensive to invest into. By splitting our health and mana pool, and not only does it let us have more survivability, but it gives us the room to cast expensive high-level skill gems as the mana cost scales exponentially on top of the damage. For the total investment, it's definitely better than regeneration, but just doesn't fit well into the meta right now. The game is sort of one-shot or get one-shot in very difficult content, even with tankiness that we have. I could see it being better if ES and Grim Feast were to be nerfed, but the overall feeling is Recoup doesn't help us scale into the very end game, where I would hope investment and survivability really should. As far as damage goes, in PoE2, spell scaling primarily comes from the gem levels, and this character is no different. In theoretical sheet with the proper Fireflower, I should be able to hit a level 37 Flame Blast. For our bossing rotation, we have a smaller Flame Blast with all of our damage supports on it in our offhand. And notably, our wand here in our offhand has % damage as lightning, which lets us shock for the juicy extra 20% damage. Then we hit our Spirit Offering, Eye of Winter, and Sniper's Mark before our Flame Blast for one big massive crit. This lets us easily one-shot difficulty 4 map bosses. I don't even use the full rotation on map bosses anymore. Even though our theoretical upper end is 35 mil, we should be able to kill pinnacle bosses. What ends up happening is a lot of pinnacle bosses have very high resistances. It feels like it's over 50-60%. It only ends up ticking for about 1/2 of difficulty 4 Just's health bar, which theoretically should be in that 35 mil range. So what I've done is I've allocated a node called Total Incineration that uses crits to refresh the duration. As far as I can tell, this means any crit, not just an igniting crit or flame blast hit, which means that we can just use Eye of Winter to constantly keep the ticking up through the entire health bar, basically giving our Ignite infinite duration, as long as we can crit every once in a while. And so for clearing, most of our mapping ends up happening through a second Flame Blast, which basically has no damage supports on it, but gives us a lot of mobility in AoE. Because we have so many gem levels, the damage ends up being just fine, and the clear is quite comfortable. It's not amazing, but because of our tankiness, we don't usually have to dodge on-ground effects and can afford to run tough maps pretty lazily. The way that I was able to achieve this tankiness was through that split scaling I was talking about, getting 40% damage taken from mana before life. If I open up POB, you'll notice that we've approaching 5k Fizz max hit, along with that 10k Elemental Chaos hit. On top of that, we're running a fairly fast recoup. Over 50% of our damage is recouped as life. Because of our damage split, this effectively says 100% of our life lost to damage is recouped over 3 seconds. The reason why it's 3 seconds and not 4 here is because I'm running Pliable Flesh that reduces recoup time by 25%, which is a multiplier after the Chronomancer recoup node. Because we need strength for warrior, in addition we can run this rare shield, which helps us get good phase mitigation and block chance. This is sort of the primary reason why it's hardest for us to die in maps, as the defenses from that shield really multiply against our life pool and recoup very well. So for gearing, the general strategy is to scale both life and mana using high ROA items and nodes on the tree, which means each piece of gear that I have has high life and high mana rolls with ES, which converts into mana after Eldritch Battery. As I pointed out earlier, we're running Warrior, which gives us Spirit for curses and percent life. Chest pieces also hit a Corrupt, which gives you life recoup, which makes this chest piece hard to replace. Obviously, the Fire Flower is a massive damage boost. I'm still trying to corrupt about +6 skill gems, which is easily another 25% more DPS over the +4. And our wands are simply +5 with extra fire damage, and also percent increased, which is surprisingly scales well because of how our split scaling is on this build. We actually don't have that much on the tree or elsewhere. So lastly, to make notes on the tree, the thing is I don't actually suggest pathing to most of the Ignite nodes on the tree, as they're just not that useful leading up to the notables. What you can do is either anoint or find megalomaniacs that give you very useful nodes. As a single megalomaniac can be 20 to 40% increased Ignite DPS because of how powerful the Ignite notables are. The big winner are really the jewels on the tree. The rare jewels are like a 10 to 15% more damage per jewel. On top of that, you can get a +3 Flame Blast, another 30-40% more damage. Another great socket is the Stud of Hope, which lets us hit all these really important mana nodes up here on top of Eldritch Battery and Arcane Blossom down here. And if you don't know what Arcane Blossom does, it's actually 15% more multiplier on all mana recovery, including recoup and regeneration. And we get to pick up 15% life recoup down here for elemental and fizz, which for 2 points is very efficient. And finally, we have the Megalomaniac. This gives me just a bunch of crit multi, and then Total Incineration for that upper end damage ceiling I was talking about. But yeah, right now our damage is in this weird place where we easily kill map bosses, but in difficulty for pinnacles. We're close to, but out of reach, which is why I've opted to lower that Ignite floor. But yeah, that's about it. I don't really want to recommend this build, but I'm putting up the PoE in the description if you're interested with what I come up with. I think Ignite is still fun to play with. Chronomancer is still fun to play with. Flame Blast is Flame Blast. It basically does exactly as you'd hope. Not great in the meta, not good for farming, but if you want to play around and have extra currency, I do recommend looking at the mechanics I messed around with. There's some pretty interesting stuff going on.